Good morning, everyone. And as we're speaking, more people are arriving. Just a brief introduction. First of all, thanks very much for joining this, what promises to be really informative, relaxed, and quite exciting and entertaining, given the personalities involved. I think I can say that. So my name is Mark Masson from FD Recruit. Huge welcome. Today it's a very informative webinar by Resolve. Don't panic, options for challenged businesses. And as James and Andrew will explain, Resolve are very involved in developing and nurturing and changing businesses. So I'd like to welcome really expert panelists. Andrew Pepper is a partner and head of restructuring at Resolve, and James Dowdall is also partner at Resolve and specialising in deals advisory. Throughout the webinar, to all those attending, if we'd welcome any questions, if you could please put these in the chat box. Don't email them, as I think Zoom tells you to, but put them in the chat box. And when Andrew and James's presentation comes to an end in about sort of 10-15 minutes or whatever, I'll filter those questions that you've put them to James and Andrew to give you the benefit of everything in their experience. So if we can get started, Andrew, James, I'll let you kick off and stop talking.
Thank you very much, Mark. My name is Andrew Pepper. I'm a partner within Resolve and I run the restructuring side. We are only concerned on this conversation about solvent restructuring, not insolvent. James and I run and work together to actually create solutions, positive solutions. Although I used to be an insolvency practitioner many years ago, I then ran a special situations business where I became a CRO, I became a chairman, became an investor, and actually bought and ran businesses. I used to run a business called Hilco Capital for many years. I then retired from that, bought into and helped a lot of small family offices, small businesses, where I again became a chairman or chief executive, or sometimes a quasi-FD. I also did partial work in the turnaround of a few mines in the last few years. I was put in as potentially the chairman of House of Fraser. And so therefore I come to you not only as an advisor, but someone with deep skills in actually how to run a business. I understand the pains and the stresses of the directors, the investors, and the FDs. So again, we're not talking about insolvency, we're talking about how can we solve a problem for a challenged business. James?
Thanks very much, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be here. My background's slightly different to Andrew's, but we certainly spent time in the same trenches before working together here at Resolve. I was formerly a banker. I was with Barclays when Lehman Brothers went over, firstly working across the UK and then across the Western European business, restructuring not only the bank itself, but also those businesses experiencing distress where we had loans. I also spent time at the investment bank at Santander and latterly HSBC. Similar to Andrew, since leaving the city, I spent time as a chief restructuring officer. That's taking board appointments in businesses that are facing challenges, distress. So I understand the pressures and the pains and how difficult it can be dealing with creditors, with lenders, sometimes with your own board and sometimes with your own shareholders. And shareholder disputes is certainly something that we've been exposed to over the years. And here at Resolve, I'm partner, head of deals advisory, primarily focusing on accelerated M&A, and we'll talk more about that a bit later on, and special situations, things that don't usually fit into normal boxes, situations that you haven't come across before, where either a different way of thinking or fresh capital and a fresh approach is required. So looking forward to do today's session.
Thank you, James. So if we move on to the next slide, please. So just to give a quick overview, these are sorts of businesses that we as partners in Resolve or as Resolve have been dealing with. So there's some well-known names there, there's some retail names, and there's a whole variety of things. So we're doing it. At the moment, James and I are looking at various businesses. James is doing a lot of work in the electrical vehicle market. I'm advising on one of the largest cannabis farms in Europe. We're doing lots of hydroponics. We're getting involved in sound businesses. These are businesses where potentially lends or investments are anywhere from 5 to say 100 million pounds. We're not doing the 400 million pound investment businesses. We are mid-market specialists, although most of the time, 50% of the time, I work in Europe. So I've got involved in a number of businesses across Europe because we don't have to get appointed as the liquidator. We're not interested in that. We're interested in helping topcos or holdcos get through problems. And they can have a subsidiary in France, Germany, Italy. So what we try and do is help and guide the boards in that process. Our first point on the next slide is creditor management. I would actually make this a wider thing. Creditor management is very narrow. I think it's stakeholder management. Stakeholders could be secured creditors, banks, asset-based lenders. Unsecured creditors will be your usual trade creditors who don't have creditor support. Then you obviously have the banks. Then you have investors. Then you have HMRC, which I think is a very large creditor. And we'll talk about HMRC because that has unique issues. And what we're seeing a lot of at the moment is how do you manage dealing with HMRC? HMRC have got some very strong powers at the moment. And even though they have been probably lax in the last few years, and many businesses have built up a lot of credit with them, especially with the CBILS loans and bounce back loans, owing the government and owing HMRC can be quite a difficult task. And unfortunately, unlike asset-based lenders or bankers, they don't really engage too much. Invariably, when you talk to them, you talk to a low-level person who basically just wants an easy life. And the easy life is pay everything now, please. Now, ultimately, we can talk to you about how to deal with those sort of people. But in reality, what we try and do is push that through to higher level thought process. Because in my experience as an FD, if you talk to the low guy, unfortunately, he just takes the easy answer, which is you should pay all your money. And you have that conversation, you'd feel worried, scared, and think, oh my God, the world is going to end. They're going to send bailiffs in, they're going to have distress, etc. My experience and our experience is if by taking that to a higher level, you get much more sympathetic people. So again, a big issue at the moment is knowing who to ask the right question of. Just because you owe money to someone, you think there's a problem on your side. Try and think of it sometimes as a joint problem. So in one sense, when we do stakeholder management, we share the problem. We try and bond with people. Now, if we don't talk to HMRC, and they just get wound up and they think that we're ignoring them, that's the last thing you want to do as an FD, because ultimately it just annoys people. Even if you can't pay them, actually engaging with them and explaining why and explaining that you're trying to do everything possible and coming across as a sensible person, they will take great store by it. Now, clearly, if you do that every month and fail every time, your presence wears out. But in our experience, engaging and trying to engage at the appropriate level with the appropriate person who has the ability to make a decision is really, really important. The same applies to dealing with the banks and dealing with your asset-based lender. Sometimes as FDs, we get nervous about not delivering what we think we can deliver. And therefore, the earliest sign of, unfortunately for ABL's fraud, is a FD making a payment inappropriately and then trying to use the next payment to cover that up. Again, you should not go there clearly, but ultimately there's no need to. In our experience, actually talking with people is actually a lot better than just carrying on in an isolation. The issue with FDs is that they sometimes believe that all roads lead to them and they have to deliver the perfect solution. In a challenge business, the perfect solution is never there. It's a compromise solution. And as an FD, you can feel like an island sometimes, especially if perhaps it's a family business where you are brought in as the financial expert, and therefore the founder is the CEO, his son or wife or daughter or whatever is working on the sales side. Sometimes you feel like you have to do everything. In our experience, you don't have to do everything. You should share, because ultimately, whilst it sounds like you have failed, you haven't really, because as an FD, you know so much. Doesn't mean you have to know everything about everything. When I passed my PE1s and PE2s, yes, I'm a qualified chartered accountant, but I'd probably be dangerous if someone asked me for my personal tax or corporate tax abilities, because that's not my specialism. As FDs, you are specialists in running the business finances, but you're not specialist at dealing with, say, for example, restructuring issues. So therefore, it's not the fact that you have failed, it's the fact that you are just being challenged. And so long as you know where to go and knowing when to panic and when not to panic, that's the key issue. Final point is unsecured creditors. Dealing with those people, on the whole, they get very bitter and twisted because they feel like you've taken the money from their children, etc. Sometimes that happens. It's very emotional. And as an FD, you don't want to get involved in that emotion. You want to deal with clean numbers. You want to deal with spreadsheets. But sometimes you find that your junior staff, credit management, just probably haven't got the wherewithal or the capacity or the character to deal with them. So therefore, you're called in. Again, we can give tips on how to deal with those because, and James will probably come on to this, as a CRO, a Chief Restructuring Officer, sometimes we spend all day, especially on larger cases, of just managing annoyed creditors. And what you find is that whilst they are annoyed and angry, by the time you've spent 5-10 minutes with them, they calm down and start accepting their situation and start looking for, well, what can you do? And now, clearly, you have to let them shout and scream at you because that's what they do. But our ability to stakeholder manage them, there are certain techniques that we can talk to you about which help a lot. James, do you want to just finish off on that?
Yeah, we've had some real success working with a number of clients who have looked at their trade creditor situation and said, look, these are long-standing relationships. We feel it's a challenge for us to have those difficult conversations, and we find that a lot of management teams, FDs, CEOs, ops, find it difficult to have those challenging conversations and sometimes embarrassing with these long-standing suppliers that they have. And what we're able to do is step into that breach, have those difficult conversations, sometimes part of a wider process where we've got a potential investor who said, you know what, we really like this business, we like the sector, we like management's plan, but the opening balance sheet position here is too levered. Can you help us do some sort of a process here in relation to the creditors? And what we've been able to do is have informal creditor compromise agreements papered, look like smell like a CVA, but without the formality of a court process, doing it discreetly, having those bilateral conversations. And we've had some real success working with management teams in delivering positive results in those circumstances.
So I think from both our perspective, creditor management or stakeholder management, it's about talking, not talking for the sake of it, but talking in a structured way that you know what your end goal is. The other side of the argument may not know what your goal is, but you'll persuade them. And the fact is sometimes it's best to outsource some of those conversations, either because you're too close or, frankly, we've seen it so many times, we know the nuance that we can say, oh, that's a buy signal for the guys who will accept the offer. Whereas if it's the first time or second time you've done it, every time someone puts up a problem, you might go, oh, they've got a problem, and I sympathize with the problem, but you might not see where the solution is in that problem. I recently had one, I'm dealing with a cannabis farm at the moment, and to all the board, a certain lender was just basically, no, we'll not compromise in any way, shape or form. I then spent 21 minutes this morning chatting to that person, and I took him through in a very honest, very straightforward way. And I guess he thought, because I was being very straight on it and very clear cut, I wasn't giving him any, frankly, bullshit. And therefore, he believed me and he bonded with me as an expert. Whereas before, directors have said so many things so many times, it just wears a bit the wolf, just crying wolf too many times. So sometimes having a fresh face on creditor management really works. We'll move on to solvent restructuring. So in solvent restructuring, there are a number of tools. Probably the best tool is actually an informal solvent restructuring. So basically, you're just doing a deal. You're saying to yourself, there are 5 people that can make a difference to our business. I don't have to deal with 100 people, the milkman, all the annoying small creditors who just go in your background. I've got 5 people to do a deal with. You have to do a deal with those people, and they are usually really smart, or you can take them to a place where they know that it's in their best interest to do a deal with you. And therefore, you spend all your time on those 5 people. And invariably, that's your bank, that maybe is the HMRC, and maybe that's 1 or 2 business critical unsecured creditors. People who you could have a straight argument with and say, you know what, I owe you 100 grand. But if you don't work with me, the business fails, you get 0. if the business succeeds, there's a good chance of getting 50 to 100 pence in the pound, in fact, all of your money back in a solvent deal. But I need your help. And I actually need to present an argument to them. Clearly, the first moments of that will be, where's my money? I'll wind you up, all this sort of stuff. But those people who are in for 100 grand or 50 grand usually back down because they know that in an insolvency, a liquidation, they get zero. So therefore, you are the difference between them getting zero and getting a substantial payment. So the first area is informal restructuring. The second area is a CVA. Effectively, you're doing a deal with your creditors, and you're basically having, again, an informal deal, which you then paper using a restructuring process. James, do you want to take us through a CVA? Because I think some of the things you've been doing where you've wrapped around a commercial deal.
Yeah, so what we normally do is part of a CVA or an informal CVA is we've got an investor who's come in and had a look and said, you know, I understand there's a need to invest X amount of money into this, but we're going to need to try and tidy up some of the elements that might be exiting certain leases, closing down certain subsidiaries, and getting into a position where you can take certain creditors with you on the journey. That might be your secured creditor. It might be a number of your critical trade creditors that Andrew's identified, those 5 really important ones, and doing a deal with them that says, look, you're going to get 50, 75 pence in the pound here. Maybe you're going to get all the money back. But do you know what? This business will survive. It will thrive. It will have future orders. We've got a new backer who has deep pockets and aligns with our strategy. And here's our forecasts. And if this comes to fruition, we'll be doing more business with you in the future.
We'll probably move on to fresh equity. James.
Yeah. So fresh equity, this is an interesting area. So this sort of like dovetails with some of the comments we've made already in the session. So one of the key aspects of the service line that we're able to offer is access to deep-pocketed special situations investors who can move very, very quickly. So these guys are typically different to your normal private equity investors in that they understand they need to move quickly. Their due diligence and processes are generally more compressed. They understand that there is a burning platform, a cash need in a business. And it's an important aspect for us to be able to provide that level of introduction and briefing to those investors for clients of ours. Now, a misconception in this segment that I've seen on numerous occasions is you get management teams who have had some challenging times, and they've been beaten up by their creditors, beaten up by their banks, and they come to us and they say, right, okay, we give up, please go and raise us some equity. And I always say to them, look, this is not how it works. You're going to need to, this is a sales process. You're going to need to dust yourselves off and put your best foot forward, because these investors are backing you as a management team. They're backing your plan. Let's work together on the plan. Let's work together on the pitch. And it happens almost every time where the management team put together a glossy IM, they put together their turnaround plan, and it looks great. And quite often it's omitting one large, very important piece, and that is what has gone wrong. And what I always say to FDs, to CEOs is be honest, get ahead of it. Let investors know what has gone wrong and explain to them the actions you have taken to correct the trajectory of the business and what the future looks like with only a bit more capital. And this is how the capital will be used. These processes can generally run between 4 and 6 weeks. Sometimes they can be shorter than that, depending on the cash needs. Sometimes they can be longer. It's always preferable from our perspective to engage in these conversations sooner rather than later. There's a slide after this one, which we'll come to shortly, which maybe I'll put it on now, which really talks around, some of you guys may have seen this before, the decline curve. You get too far down the distressed line and all of a sudden your creditors are making lots of noise. There are potentially statutory demands coming in, HMRC are not on side, and that creates a real burn in the cash position and allows less time for boards and shareholders to make sensible decisions. It also allows less time for us to run a good competitive process. Now, why a competitive process is important in the sort of fresh equity rescue piece is that typically equity at that end of the market can be expensive, and to be able to make sure we can drive best value for our clients is we like to have a competitive process that is bringing numerous parties to the table. We have a very deep black book, and we will go out and we'll position the business accordingly and generate as much interest as we can. And it's really important for management teams to put their best foot forward, and we'll support them on that journey. Anything else from you, Andrew, on this segment?
Yeah, thank you. So typically over the last year, we've probably done about 25 special situation raises. And usually through our black book and also through our research, we probably go out to between 300 and 400 investors. And that could be usually global investors as well. So for example, I'm dealing with a cannabis business. I'm also dealing with a staged business. We dealt with a very large 400 million turnover retail across Europe. All these people we went to with as James said, a defined view on life. It has to show what went wrong and what's going to go right. There has to be a sell. Now, the sell is at a lesser price. If you're doing a normal corporate finance sale, someone will spend 6 months with you. They'll mirror image you. They'll run parallel with the business. We haven't got that time because on this graph, so long as you're not in the red zone, you may have 5 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks. We can get things done on that. And we believe in our business so much that most of the work we do is on a success basis. So invariably, we'll charge 10 to 30,000 pounds up front. And then we'll say we want X% of the wealth that comes to you through our hard efforts. So therefore, if we win, you win. If we lose, then frankly, you've lost as well. But we're prepared to back ourselves. Therefore, you get in as not people looking for administrations and liquidations. You're getting in our team, people are saying, how do I make a big success fee? The solution is get money into this business. And if we get money into the business, we get paid, but more importantly, you survive as well. And we've done that very, very well and very strongly over the last year. There is a mound of money out there. It's pretty random. So as I was saying earlier, James has been dealing with some electrical vehicle businesses, battery businesses. I've been doing stages, retail, hydroponics, normal joinery business, random stuff. But there's random money out there for the great deal. So do not think, oh my God, I'm a small little business doing whatever. Think about what value you can give to a third-party investor. Can you convince them that your business used to be good? There's a reason why there's a problem, and there's a reason why you can turn it around, and it needs 1 million or 2 million pounds or 4 million pounds. And you can be persuasive to me and to James, because we want to make sure that we understand and we take you forward. If we don't believe in it, frankly, I'm not in this to do 15, 20 grand's worth of work. I'm in this to make a big success fee. We need to make sure that we understand your business and understand that you have a good chance of doing it. And we'll back you to the hilt. That's what we do. Very commercial, partner-led, ability to say, we've been in the trenches alongside you. James, should we move on to refinancing?
Indeed, refinancing. This is a really interesting one. Being an ex-banker, it's very familiar to me being on both sides of the fence, i.e. dealing with in the institutions referred to as delinquent customers, or they're referred to when you're in the live side, you're a client or a customer, and when you're in the bad book, you're a file. And it's just interesting the terminology that's used in the banks. It's just all the banks do it. It's interesting how that works. And sometimes when businesses are in distress and they're facing challenging times, one of the last things they think about is refinancing, because they've drawn the conclusion that our lender hates us, we're in default, or we've breached a covenant, or we've got some challenging conversations ongoing with them, and we'll never be able to refinance. We'd love to be able to do it, but we think where we are in the game, who's going to take us? We've been beaten up by our lender. They're not saying yes anymore. They're continually saying no. They're squeezing our facilities. Who else is going to take us? Aspirationally, they'd like to do it, but they find it a really daunting process on the most part. And we're able to really help here. Now, one of the key parts of this process that we find is, and we have to explain this to FDs and to CEOs and to management teams and to boards, is you haven't got to completely fix the business. You've got to turn the corner, turn the ship around, get it going in the right direction. As Andrew said before, a really clear plan. Continue to stay close to your clients, manage costs, see a path through the challenging times. And what you're able to do at that point is begin to have those interesting conversations with the alternative lending market. This isn't a bad term. These are asset-backed lenders. These are challenger banks. These are debt funds. They have capital. They are very commercial, and they are happy to deploy into turnaround situations. And that's sometimes something new that we don't hear, that many FDs don't appreciate. And this isn't just to bash incumbent lenders, because incumbent lenders inadvertently, by trying to be helpful through COVID and by providing COVID loans, RLSs, what they've done is help a client out, a borrower out at a time of need, provided that emergency liquidity. But as some of the FDs on this call will be aware, some of those facilities have restrictions, i.e. you can provide a 6-month, 12-month capital repayment holiday, but after that you can do nothing else. So we've had a number of instances with clients who have got their COVID facilities, they've made their way through, they've begun to sort of see light at the end of the tunnel, they're just turning the corner, but now the capital element has kicked in on those facilities. And they've come to us and we've put together a plan, and we've got a really credible turnaround plan. We've gone to the bank, and the bank has said, yeah, we buy into your plan. We've seen your order book. It looks really impressive. You like what you've done with your cost control. It looks exciting. And the credit officer says, no, we will not extend and amend our facility because I've got an 80% government guarantee. And for me to walk away from that, I'm going to look very stupid if something goes wrong in the future. Therefore, I'm going to hold the line, even though I agree with your plan. And in normal course of previous cycles, credit officers have been more open to those discussions and those debates and those restructuring options. They are less so now, but we can take that to the challenger market, the debt funds, the ABLs, who are very commercial. We have very good relationships with them. We know how to show deals. I think that's a really important aspect. We don't just fire something over and say, have a look at this, guys. We think it's good. We spend time with management. We kick the tires on the forecasts. We really get into the detail of the turnaround plan. And we work with you in those discussions with the lenders to make sure we put your best foot forward. And we've had some real success in delivering some of those. Anything else from you, Andrew?
Yeah, just to take you through, in the last year, I've done 5 deals where I've refinanced the company or delivered a solution where the incumbent lender now loves the company. So therefore, we can rebuild trust. And you might hear the phrase lender fatigue, and that means they're just fed up with you, but you've got to get them back onto the straight and narrow. Got to get back into love with the business. A good example is a joinery business we dealt with a few months ago, 30 million turnover, foreign ownership, very large bank was in there for the last 2 or 3 years, fed up and said, right, we're appointing a person to be doing an IBR, an independent business review. They concluded that the business had problems, and the bank then used those people to try and find an investor to kind of save the company and get rid of the bank. They didn't, and we came in at the behest of the company, because often banks may have a view on life. The company is also allowed a view on life. So we came in, we pushed back on the bank. I thought the business was great. I went back to the bank and says, give us a month to actually sort this out. The bank sat there waiting, and they were going to put the company to administration. I went out to the market. We found 9 people who would take the bank out and give it a positive solution. So therefore, the same assets, the same view, but viewed from a different perspective, different optics. It's amazing how many people you can bring in. Now, clearly, we had to spin a story as well, talk about the upsides, reshape the look of the business, reshape the story of the business. But then we got the whole business refinanced, went through to an alternative asset-based lender. Strangely, the major bank who appointed a major insolvency firm to look at the business went to people like Barclays. Now, I'm not giving you the name of the first bank, but Barclays and this other bank are very similar. So there's no way, if the major bank to start with didn't like the business from a credit, from a story, Barclays would love it. So what's the point? So we went to a very specialist set of lenders, still normal mainstream, only a couple of percentages higher in cost than the main bank, but we took them through a story and we've saved the business. And we got a massive success fee because we saved the business. The directors are delighted. They retain their business. They were looking at losing everything in a failure. So to James's point, just because you believe there's a problem or your bank is telling you there's a problem, you sometimes need independent second opinion. Imagine a doctor. We're company doctors. We might say, if you can chop that leg off, we can save the body. Another doctor might say, just bin the whole thing. There's always positivity. So I'd like to end on that. We'll now go back to Mark and talk about questions. But please understand, the same assets, the same business, the same story, viewed from a different direction, often has amazingly different results. That's really, really important.
Well, that was absolutely great. Thanks very much. And I'm going to shoot straight into filtering some. I've got some questions. I know there's 1 or 2 coming through. I would encourage anyone now to put questions in the chat box. which I'll filter out to Andrew and James. And we'll probably close off in about 15 minutes or so. So Neil, thanks, Neil. Neil's asked a question. What sort of terms, in brackets, preference rights, etc., do rescue credit providers look for?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. Yeah, it's good question. It's fair to say that the rescue equity special sits guys are an expensive option. They're often the last option when companies are in that situation. It can vary. You typically see a special sits investor wanting to take control of a business, so that will mean a minimum of 51% of the equity. They may put money in via a hybrid, so there'll be some equity coming in. They would also often put in a debt instrument. It enables them to have better control if they do it like that. But, it's important to remember that the absolute critical part of these investments is the management team. So the management team need to be incentivized, and the special sits guys are very aware of this fact. They like to get management on board, and the management have equity in the business as well to deliver that turnaround story. These aren't hostile appointments. If the management team is saying, no, we don't like you, we don't want to do it, they just won't do the deal. They'll just go and walk off and do something else. These are very consensual processes. They need to ensure management are incentivized. And quite often we structure these deals where management might have 30% on day one, but as they begin to hit targets and money is returned to the investors, that goes from 30 up to 45, up to 50. And then they're in a position to conduct a management buyout and the special sits investor goes somewhere else. So these are circumstances where the value is on the table, it is depressed. It can be expensive compared to normal private equity or compared to a pure debt solution, but they're here to save the business and they're here to incentivize management to create value.
And I say that the best restructuring special sits people want management to get rid of them and buy them out. So therefore, if they come in and say, we want all the equity because you're useless, we'll take over. You don't want those guys because they're not really interested in the business. They're just interested in buying the assets cheaply. What you want is someone who says, I'll give you 30% on day one. I'll give you a milestone that you can buy me out so long as you give me 3 times my money over 2 years or something like that. Because when I used to be a special situations owner, I wanted the management working really hard while I was asleep. You want them thinking all the time, how do I pay off Andrew? And I'm happy to get my 3 times money, but I'm actually more encouraged that they want to pay me off because that implies you have a belief in your business. The best special situations guys really want to use the management to help themselves and to help management. It's a very important point. It's not the tire kickers of yesterday when someone wants to buy the property for X% of value. They're not really interested in management. Management are crucial to turn around a business. And everyone who's a smart guy investor understands that. Don't be afraid of them.
Thanks very much. I move on straight because we've got a few more questions coming in and keep putting them in, everyone. This is great. James has said, and I'll just repeat ad lib, outstanding presentation. Sometimes is a change of management required, and how does one go about that?
Can I take that one? So I think you find sometimes that there's a life cycle to a business. Often there is a founder, then the founder gets booted up to being CEO or chairman, or sometimes being an ambassador. So I think one of the reasons why sometimes businesses end up in problems is because the energy that was once expended on that business is no longer there. And therefore, whilst it sounds awful and brutal to say someone has to leave, if that person has left and allowed the business to make lots of money, so be it. If they have left and the business has declined, then you owe it to the business to actually say, how do I improve that? And if that's someone falling on their sword, remember they're falling on the sword at a value which is zero anyway, because if you are the equity owner and you're talking to people like us, their equity has limited value. So in one sense, it sounds bad, but it is the law of the jungle. If you're no longer running the business and your energy is no longer able to make the business work properly, then sometimes you just need a reboot. Sometimes you need an extra fresh pair of eyes. That doesn't mean whole scale everyone loses their jobs. It might just mean someone goes from CEO to maybe ambassador to chairman. and a new person comes in to give it legs. So therefore, there's always combinations and hybrids, and I'd push for the hybrid. James?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And being a CRO, you're no stranger to changes in management. It always seems to be part of the job in most instances and part of most engagements. But in terms of, the question about the element of that question about where do you start, how do you find additional management or support at that level? Resolve, we have a big black book of interim specialists across the whole plethora of corporate services, whether it be FDs, specialist ops people, specialist tech people. So we can help by introducing you to certain individuals who can help bolster the board, bolster the management team. It's also worth noting that special sits guys often have specialists in certain sectors that they can call on. So they don't go and make these investments and say to management, you're on your own. They'll say, look, we'll put one of our guys on your board. We've got a specialist who's very big in solar, for example. We've worked with this guy across numerous solar investments. He is a top performer in this space. He knows the legislation. He knows people in government. We'll get him to advise on this portfolio company of ours now as a team. We'll collaborate together, and they want to share their best learning and their knowledge to jointly build value in the business. So if you're engaging with us and with the special sits community, and there is a need for additional human capital, that can be facilitated.
Thanks very much. And I will obviously, with my hat on to some extent, say that we're working very closely with Andrew and James on facilitating human capital and specialist turnaround and interims, as well as their access to market also, which is great. And Stuart's great question from Stuart here as well. What do you recommend to turn around the management team, to make them excited about the business again? What catalysts are useful in this?
James?
Yeah, I think what we need to do, and we find this quite often, is you go in and you meet management teams, and they've been beaten up by the circumstances they're in. And I think what we do is spend time working on that turnaround plan. That isn't a plan that's forced down throats and just purely focuses on costs and creditors and CVAs and other instruments. It's about understanding the market opportunity, sitting down collaboratively, getting the views of everyone across that management team, and building participation into what the plan is going forward. Because if those various people have put into that plan and share the vision and share the growth story, they're generally more incentivized to get behind and do it. Now, if during that process you have someone who's just grumpy in the corner, doesn't seem interested, then you need to ask yourselves as a board, as a management team, as a director, is that human someone we want as part of this business to drive it forward? Turnaround requires focus, passion, and energy. And if you don't have that at the top table, you need to look at yourselves and say, right, do we need to pick ourselves up and find that energy and passion? Or do we need to bring in a couple of extra people to drive that story forwards?
I come across people and I call them smiling terrorists. I know it sounds awful, but they sit there at the board and they go, yes, 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 of course, of course, of course. And they leave the board, not going to change a thing. In fact, sometimes they inadvertently try to destroy it because they cannot understand that if they didn't come up with the answer, it's not great. There's some strange envy issues here. So you've got to detect that, because in a restructuring, you want to look around the table, your 2-3 people, colleagues, and go, is everyone here justified, wanted 120%, can deliver something to this? And you don't have to deliver beyond. You just have to do what you're supposed to be doing. You want to know that you could turn to any of your colleagues and go, we've got a real problem here. I'm not sure of the answer. Can we have a chat about it? And know that they will put as much effort into it as if it was their point. That it really, I call it also coming into the trenches. You know who your guys, friends, or people you can rely on. If you've had a difficult weekend and you're all trying to work out, how do we face Monday morning with an A problem, B problem, or C problem? So the idea that you go around to each other's houses and you sit around a kitchen table and go, what are we going to do? Teams and obviously Zoom gets rid of that. But you used to be around at people's houses on a Sunday afternoon thinking, oh my God, that really bonds people, and you can really tell who's in it and who's not in it.
Thanks for that. And I think I missed this question from Brad, but you kind of answered it to some extent. But what resources do you use to go in and assess a business? Do you use independent, experienced turnaround interims?
Yeah,
James,
yeah,
you be one.
Yeah, I've done that job, and I absolutely loved doing that job actually. So, and we have from being in that community. Obviously, we know a lot of people in that community, and we have a black book of people that we can introduce. Resolve in its previous guise also had an investment fund that done over 50 deals. So they've deployed balance sheet in businesses, turned them around, and that wasn't done just using the partners here. That was done using expert turnaround people, and we know who those guys are and girls, what positions they've filled in the past, what their success has been. When we can look at a situation with a business and say, you know what, you're light in this area. Here's 3 names. Why don't you go and have a conversation with them? And we can help assess the management team. So we can help with all that.
That's brilliant, and that's the questions that have come through. And timing wise, we're sort of drawing to a close anyway. But Andrew, James, is there anything you would like to say before I close off this really outstanding webinar?
Please, yeah, just one point. I think I alluded to it at the start. When you get to a certain age in our profession, there are a lot of partners who have sat in ivory towers who have only ever been an advisor. They're great, but my experience is that you really want to have people advising and helping you who've actually seen it and actually sat as a director, as a chairman, as an FD, as a sales or commercial director, as an investor around the table, and actually can provide insight and empathy with where you are. Because it's all right from an ivory tower saying, oh, you must do this, you must do that, you should have been a better person, oh, it's terrible, we've got to A, B, and C. But that's just bloody annoying, to be honest. What you really need to understand is someone who understands where you've come from, understand why you're making that change. Because to pick up the phone to people like us actually requires a restructuring thought process, because sometimes people just don't know when they don't know. And it's very, very important that you aren't afraid of people like us, whether it's us or a competitor firm. Pick up the phone to someone, take specialist advice, whether it's ours or whether it's someone else. I prefer you to speak to us, but ultimately, I just want you to look after yourselves. Take that special advice. You don't have to give someone X thousand pounds. You can chat about the problem, have a call, and then hopefully reflect on that. And most of you will probably get what we're saying is common sense. And therefore, our help plus your understanding of the company is often enough, especially if you're higher up the decline curve. Clearly, the lower you go and start hitting that red area, that's where you require probably more time from James and myself. But up towards where underperformance starts, sometimes it could just be a coffee and just going, can we help? Have you thought about A, B, and C? And sometimes we just go, you know what? We're looking after our people, and therefore we'll happily have a free conversation. So therefore, do not be afraid of actually asking an informal question of people. James, is there anything else you want to say?
Yeah, just that's a really good point. We're always just the obvious point is we're always open to have a call, a quick coffee. There's no obligation. We can talk to you about this what you've seen. And there's 2 key things for me is we've always seen a company in a worse condition than yours. That always happens. So don't worry about that. And I also want to make the point that, sometimes I've been, having been a CRO and been a banker, I've seen advisors talk at management teams. This is what you should be doing. Here it is on a piece of paper, and then just walk off. Here's our IBR that costs you 150 grand. It's got it in there, what you should do. And guess what? The bank has an extra page that you haven't seen is what we really think about you. No, we don't do that. We work collaboratively with management teams to find solvent solutions. And we're able to bring in all that additional knowledge and know-how, whether it be from market, sector, and introducing interims, introducing special sits, refinancing to specialist lenders or regular lenders, depending on what the need is. So we work in a collaborative fashion. This isn't a case of clients coming in and saying we're in trouble, and us sort of sitting there saying, "Oh God, that's obvious. You shouldn't have done that. Why did you do that?" We don't do that. We're here to find solutions, solvent solutions, and work with clients hand in glove. We almost become, inside the tent. Trusted advisor status is what Andrew and I hope to achieve through all of our engagements.
Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk to your recruits, the FD recruits clients.
Thank you
No,
very much.
an absolute pleasure. And I think when I met you both some time ago, I said, I really look forward to, a long-term building business and relationship together. And, that very much stands. I've got to thank you for a really incredibly, genuinely informative, enjoyable presentation. I think everyone here is kind of from the chat echoed that. I'll just close off with a couple of comments. Paul said, really enjoyed this presentation. I've met a few smiling assassins. And, Brad thoroughly enjoyed this presentation. Anyway, so I'd like to thank you all for attending. Do feel free to make contact with Andrew and James about any of these issues or businesses you're involved with. And we'll be sending out some information to you as well about Resolve and Andrew and James. So hopefully we'll interact on something one way or another with FD Recruit going forward. And thanks very much again.
Thank you very much for the time.
Absolute pleasure. Catch up very shortly, everyone.
Thank you very much.